December 25th, 1997. Annapurna, Nepal. Anatoli Boukreev had been on the mountain for 23 days. The temperature above his position was minus 40 degrees Celsius. At 5,700 meters, he was fixing ropes in a couloir on the south face when the western wall above him broke loose. A search team reached his last known camp 10 days later. The tent was empty. 5 years before that, on a different mountain, Kangchenjunga, Nepal, May 12, 1992. Wanda Rutkiewicz had already climbed 8 of the 14 8,000ers. At 8,200 meters in heavy snowfall, her climbing partner tried one last time to convince her to descend. She sent him down. He was the last person to ever see her alive. K2, Pakistan. February 2021. Summit temperature, minus 41 degrees Celsius. Wind chill of minus 62. 3 men set out to be the second expedition in history to summit K2 in winter. They were last seen at the bottleneck. Their bodies were found 5 months later, hanging from the fixed ropes. 3 mountains, 3 different countries, 3 deaths that barely made the news. Every one of them has a higher death rate than Everest, and almost no one talks about them. From Annapurna's avalanche-swept south face, where 1 in 3 climbers historically did not survive the summit attempt, to Kangchenjunga's remote ridges where helicopter rescue is effectively impossible, to K2 in the one season no expedition had ever been known to survive. This is what the most dangerous mountains in the world look like when nobody is watching. These are the 3 mountains with higher death rates than Everest, and why no one talks about them. Welcome to Tourist Tragedies. Annapurna sits at 8,091 meters in the heart of Nepal. Most people have never heard of it. That is exactly the problem. Everest has a summit death rate of roughly 2.5%, according to the Himalayan database. Annapurna's was approximately 32% across its first 6 decades of recorded attempts. 1 death for every 3 successful summits. The difference between those 2 mountains is not altitude. It is not technical difficult. It is attention. Not Alex McIntyre, the British alpinist killed by a single falling stone while opening a new route on Annapurna's south face in October of 1982. Not Young Seok Park, the South Korean mountaineer who had summited all 14 8,000ers before Annapurna claimed him in 2011. Annapurna had ended more elite climbers per attempt than any mountain on Earth. Among the people who knew it best, they had a phrase for it: the mountain that doesn't give you back. Anatoli Boukreev was not a tourist. He had summited 10 of the 14 8,000ers without supplemental oxygen. In May of 1996, he had rescued 3 climbers from near certain death on Everest's South Col during the blizzard that killed 8 people that night, while most other guides on the mountain were unable to leave their tents. He had climbed Everest 4 times. He had traversed all 4 of Kangchenjunga's peaks. He knew exactly where he was going when he arrived at Annapurna Base Camp in December of 1997. By the 24th of that month, life was quite simply perfect. December 25th, 1997, 12:15 in the afternoon. The sky above Annapurna Base Camp was clear. The conditions at altitude looked stable. That was the particular cruelty of Annapurna. The conditions very often looked stable until the moment they were not. Boukreev was in a couloir at 5,700 meters with Italian alpinist Simone Moro and Kazakh cinematographer Dmitry Sobolev. They were fixing ropes on a new route between the east face of Annapurna Fang and the mountain's southwest ridge. 3 weeks of approach work had already gone into it. Boukreev had flown by helicopter to base camp on December 2nd. He had, as always, brought no supplemental oxygen. He never did. That morning, before they started, he had sat for a while on a large flat stone outside base camp. He was known to do this. That stone would later carry his memorial plaque. To understand what happens next, you need to understand what a cornice is. A cornice is a mass of wind-compressed snow and ice that builds over a ridgeline. Picture a breaking ocean wave, frozen at the instant of breaking, leaning out over a cliff edge by several meters, held in place by nothing but its own internal structure, On Annapurna's western wall, cornices hang over the couloirs below by the height of a 4-story building. When they break, they do not break slowly, they go. And as they fall, they gather. Ice becomes debris, becomes avalanche. By the time it reaches anyone 2,000 meters below, it is no longer a cornice. It is a moving wall of compacted ice and rock. On Annapurna, the standard routes between camps pass directly beneath these formations. There is no other way through. At 12:15, Moro was the highest of the 3 men. He was working through the upper section of the couloir. Boukreev and Sobolev were below him. They were at 5,700 meters. Annapurna's summit was still more than 2,300 meters above them. Let that number sit for a moment. 2,300 meters of ascent still remained above these men. To put that in terms that make the scale real, 2,300 meters is approximately the cruising altitude at which commercial aircraft begin their initial descent into a city. They were at that distance below the summit, in December, on a route no team had completed, without supplemental oxygen. Moro was the first to see it. At the ridgeline at 6,350 meters, an ice cornice broke loose. In the time it took him to shout a warning to the men below, the mass had already begun to gather. The avalanche was 50 meters wide before it reached the couloir. Moro called out. He saw Boukreev move to his right, toward the couloir wall. The mass hit the couloir. Moro grabbed the fixed rope with bare hands. The rope tore through his palms to the tendons. He fell 700 meters down the slope. He landed just above Camp 1. He lost consciousness. He came back. He called out both names. No one answered. Sobolev disappeared beneath car-sized blocks of ice. Boukreev had been seen moving to the right of the couloir. Then he was gone. Moro descended 6 hours. His hands were stripped to the bone. He could see out of only one eye. He crawled the final section without equipment, in shredded clothing, in temperatures that should not have been survivable. He reached base camp. He sent for help. Helicopters flew search runs over the avalanche site. On January 3, 1998, a ground party of Sherpas and Kazakh climbers finally reached Camp 1. The tent was intact. Their equipment was inside. There was no sign of Boukreev. There was no sign of Sobolev. The following day, their deaths were officially confirmed. Anatoli Boukreev was 39 years old. 3 weeks before arriving at Annapurna Base Camp, he had received the American Alpine Club's highest award for valor, the David A. Sowles Memorial Award. At the organization's annual gathering, he had shaken hands. He had worn a jacket that was not a down jacket for the first time in months. In December of 1997, he had been working on a new book. His notes and his camera were on Annapurna. His body was never found. When you look at the sequence of what happened to Anatoli Boukreev on Annapurna, something doesn't quite add up. A climber with 10 8,000ers without oxygen does not simply get caught in an objective hazard on a clear afternoon. Not without the mountain having put it there. The part that bothers me is this. 9 months before the avalanche, Boukreev told the people around him that he had dreamed of dying on a mountain in an avalanche. Not as a nightmare, as a certainty. When one of them tried to steer him toward a different path, toward something quieter, he said, "Mountains are my life. It is too late to take another road." He had survived Everest's worst night in modern history. He had the experience and the judgment to recognize the hazard above him. He had studied Annapurna before the attempt. I don't know what to do with that. But what happened to Wanda Rutkiewicz on Kangchenjunga in the spring of 1992 may introduce a completely different way of thinking about what I am looking at here. I don't know. Annapurna took Boukreev and left almost no record of why, partly because almost no one was watching. No documentary crew, no broadcaster with rights to the expedition. The story ran in specialist climbing publications and nowhere else. But what happens when it is not about experience at all? What happens when every decision is correct and the mountain wins anyway? What happened to Wanda Rutkiewicz on Kangchenjunga is a different theory entirely, May of 1992. Kangchenjunga, Nepal. Kangchenjunga does not look like a killing ground. From a distance, it looks like something drawn from a myth. 5 peaks arranged along a single massif, the snowfields between them broad and bright. The whole formation strangely calm against the sky. That is the first mistake most people make about Kangchenjunga. According to the Himalayan database, 52 climbers had died on Kangchenjunga against approximately 532 successful summits as of 2022, roughly 1 death for every 10 successful summits. Everest's comparable figure is 1 in 40, but the Himalayan database also records something more specific. Since the 1990s, more than 20% of all people who attempted Kangchenjunga's summit did not return. The difference between Kangchenjunga and Everest is not altitude. It is what happens when something goes wrong. Helicopter rescue is effectively impossible above the high camps. The mountain's Indian side is legally off-limits to climbers. The approach from Nepal takes 2 weeks of trekking through terrain where radio contact is unreliable. When Kangchenjunga takes someone, the mountain keeps them. Wanda Rutkiewicz had been the first woman to summit K2 without supplemental oxygen. She had been the 3rd woman to summit Everest and the first from Europe. She had climbed 8 of the 14 8,000ers, and she had named her project the Caravan of Dreams. In photographs from that spring of 1992, she looked like a woman with 5 mountains still to go and no intention of stopping. On May 12th, at 3:30 in the morning, she left Camp 4 and started the final ascent. May 12th, 1992, 3:30 in the morning. Kangchenjunga. Rutkiewicz and Mexican climber and expedition leader Carlos Carsolio left Camp 4 at 7,950 meters together in darkness and in heavy snowfall. They climbed at their own pace. Rutkiewicz had been struggling with acclimatization throughout the expedition. She had arrived at base camp in early spring, with edema on her face. She was moving more slowly than usual. Those who had watched her at the lower camps described a woman who was physically drained but had no intention of stopping. She knew exactly the state she was in. She went anyway. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what climbing above Camp 4 on Kangchenjunga actually means. There are no fixed ropes above that point. There is no rescue infrastructure above the high camps. The mountain has no helicopter-accessible landing site at altitude. At 8,000 meters on Kangchenjunga, in the literal physical sense, you are unreachable. After approximately 12 hours of climbing through deep snow, Carsolio reached the summit. 12 hours of sustained effort in heavy snowfall, at altitude, without fixed ropes above them. The average person walking at sea level covers roughly 4 kilometers in 12 hours. These 2 climbers, over 12 hours of continuous effort on a slope that averaged 50 degrees and near zero visibility, covered the final 800 meters of vertical ascent. That is what Kangchenjunga asks of you. On the descent from the summit, at somewhere between 8,200 and 8,300 meters, Carsolio found her. She was sheltering in a hollow in the snow. She was still 500 meters from the top. She was moving slowly. He could see she was weakened. He had no tent for her. She had no sleeping bag. He tried to convince her to come with him. He was depleted from his own push. He could not make her go. She would stay. She would continue in the morning. He descended. Rutkiewicz was alone. 8,200 meters. No shelter, no tent, night falling, no rescue possible above her position. She was never seen again. Her body was never found. Wanda Rutkiewicz was 49 years old. Over a 25-year climbing career, she had lost 30 friends and partners to the mountains. She had climbed through every one of those losses. In her notes from that expedition, written before the summit attempt, she was still describing the project she called the Caravan of Dreams in the present tense. She had 6 mountains left to go. Kangchenjunga was not supposed to be the last one. 3 years later, a body was found on Kangchenjunga's southwest face by an Italian expedition. Initial descriptions suggested it might be Rutkiewicz. Further analysis of clothing and equipment indicated it was more likely a Bulgarian climber who had died on the mountain in 1994. No one has ever confirmed what happened above 8,200 meters on the morning of May 12, 1992. Whether Wanda Rutkiewicz reached the summit of Kangchenjunga is not known. If she did, she would have been the first woman to stand on the summits of the world's 3 tallest mountains. Annapurna and Kangchenjunga are nothing alike. Different geography, different altitude profiles, different failure modes, the same silence. A pattern is forming, and it only fully locks into place with one more piece. What Ali Sadpara attempted on K2 in the winter of 2021 is that piece. February 4th, 2021, K2, Pakistan. K2, 8,611 meters, Pakistan and China. It is the only mountain on Earth that had never been summited in winter until 2021, 67 years after its first ascent. Among climbers, it is called the Savage Mountain. Unlike most nicknames in alpinism, this one was not invented by a marketing team. Ali Sadpara had summited 8 of the 14 8,000ers. In 2016, he had been part of the first expedition ever to reach the summit of Nanga Parbat in winter, a feat that had been attempted for over 50 years and had claimed multiple lives in the trying. He was the youngest of 11 children from the village of Sadpara in Gilgit-Baltistan. 8 of his siblings had not survived childhood. On the morning of February 4th, 2021, the temperature at K2's summit was minus 41 degrees Celsius, wind chill of minus 62. He checked his gear and walked toward the Savage Mountain with his 21-year-old son, Sajid, beside him. February 4th, 2021. 11 in the evening, K2. 4 climbers left Camp 3 together in sub-zero darkness. Ali Sadpara, his son Sajid, Icelandic mountaineer John Snorri Sigurjonsson, and Chilean climber Juan Pablo Moore Prieto. No Sherpa support above base camp. No fixed ropes on the upper mountain. No rescue infrastructure within any useful range. 3 weeks earlier, a Nepalese team led by Nirmal Purja had become the first expedition in history to summit K2 in winter, a feat that had defeated every previous attempt for 67 years. Sadbihara's team intended to do what no one had yet done, reach the same summit in winter without supplemental oxygen. This was the last great problem in high-altitude mountaineering. The bottleneck is a narrow couloir at 8,200 meters on K2. Above it hangs a serac field that all climbers must pass directly beneath. It is widely considered the most dangerous single stretch of terrain on any standard climbing route in the world. At that altitude without supplemental oxygen, human blood begins to thicken, decision-making deteriorates. The body is closing down systems in sequence to protect the core, and the only exit from above the bottleneck is through the bottleneck itself. At 8,200 meters, Sajid reached for his oxygen regulator. It was leaking. It could not be used. His father examined it. They exchanged a few words at the bottleneck. His father told him to descend to Camp 3 and wait. Sajid descended. His father continued. Snorri continued. Moore continued. The 3 men were last seen at the bottleneck, the morning of February 5th. Wind above 40 kilometers per hour. They did not return to Camp 3 that night. They did not return the following day. On February 18th, Pakistani authorities declared them dead. Their bodies were found 5 months later. A Sherpa rope-fixing team discovered them in July when the summer snow began to thaw. They were hanging from the fixed ropes 300 meters below the bottleneck. Equipment analysis confirmed they had reached the summit. They had frozen to death on the descent in a storm. Sajid Sadpara climbed back to K2 that summer. He retrieved his father's body from the slope, alone, and carried it down to Camp 4, where he buried it under the snow and placed a Pakistani flag to mark the location. He offered prayers. Then he came down. Muhammad Ali Sadpara was 45 years old. Quick heads up. Every week I drop new videos you will not find anywhere else. Please subscribe. When you lay Annapurna, Kangchenjunga, and K2 in winter side by side, something becomes very clear. These are not obscure mountains. They are invisible ones. There is a difference. In high-altitude mountaineering, researchers and expedition analysts use the term objective hazard to describe the category of risk that is not caused by a climber's decisions, but by the mountain's inherent, unpreventable environmental forces. Avalanche releases, Sirac collapses, sudden extreme weather, forces that no level of skill or preparation can fully mitigate. These three mountains are, each in a different way, the purest expression of that problem. On Annapurna. Boukreev was working methodically on a clear afternoon at a relatively low altitude on the mountain. The cornice that took him had nothing to do with his decisions. It would have taken anyone in that couloir. On Kangchenjunga, Rutkiewicz was physically weakened, but what sealed her fate was not her condition. It was the absence of any rescue structure below her. She was unreachable. On Kangchenjunga, the objective hazard is not just the terrain, it is the isolation. On K2 in winter, Sadpara, Snorri, and more had the right experience, the right window, and the right plan. What they did not have, above the bottleneck at minus 40 degrees in winter conditions, was anyone who could reach them in time. But the technical explanation is only half of it. Annapurna, Kangchenjunga, and K2 in winter are not in the headlines because headlines follow money. Everest currently has dozens of permitted expedition companies on the mountain each season, helicopter rescue capability to around 7,000 meters, fixed ropes from base camp to the summit, supplemental oxygen at every camp, and a media market that has produced multiple feature films and hundreds of books. These mountains have none of that. When someone dies on Annapurna, Kangchenjunga, or K2 in winter, the death appears in specialist climbing publications and nowhere else. The silence and the danger are the same thing. These mountains kill more people per attempt than Everest, because the people who go there have less information, less support, and less rescue infrastructure than any Everest climber has had in the last 30 years. And they have less support because no one is watching. And no one is watching because there is no commercial infrastructure to sustain the coverage. Boukreev, Rutkiewicz, and Sadpara did not die because they were unprepared. They were three of the most prepared mountaineers in the world. They died because every small invisible failure lined up perfectly for a tragedy that no one was watching closely enough to prevent. Tell me in the comments, had you heard of Annapurna, Kangchenjunga, or K2 in winter before this video? Because I think the silence is the story.